Chains rattled in the dark, and a girl's breath came out in short, painful gasps. Alara pressed her back against the cold stone wall of the dungeon, listening to footsteps she did not recognize. They were heavier than the guards who usually came at this hour. Slower, more careful. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs from the inside. She had been in this cell for 11 days. She had counted every one of them by scratching a line into the stone with a broken fingernail. 11 days since soldiers dragged her from her home and accused her of a crime she never committed. 11 days since anyone had looked at her like she was still a person, and not a problem waiting to be solved. The footsteps stopped outside her cell door. A key turned in the lock, slow and deliberate, and torchlight spilled across the floor. Alara squinted against the sudden brightness, raising a trembling hand to shield her eyes. A tall figure stepped into the doorway, and even in her weakened state, she felt the air in the room change. It grew heavier, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. The man wore a dark cloak lined with silver thread, the kind only nobility could afford. But it was not his clothing that made her go still. It was his eyes. They were sharp, gold-flecked, and locked onto her with an intensity that made her stomach twist. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, her voice hoarse from disuse. He did not answer right away. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, he looked as though he were fighting something inside himself, some private battle she could not see. His hand curled into a fist at his side, knuckles whitening. "I am the one who decides whether you live or die," he finally said, though something about the way he said it sounded less like a threat, and more like he was trying to convince himself it was true. Alara did not flinch. 11 days in a dungeon had a way of burning fear down to something harder underneath. "Then decide," she said, "or leave me be." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or admiration. He crouched down until they were eye level, studying her the way a man studies a puzzle he cannot solve. Up close, she could see a faint gold ring around his irises that seemed to pulse gently, like a heartbeat. "You do not know who I am," he said quietly. "Should I?" "I am Damien Ashgrove, king of this land, alpha of the Blackthorn Pack." He said it plainly, without the arrogance she expected from men who wore crowns. "And you are supposed to be executed at dawn." The words landed like a physical blow. Alara's breath caught, and despite her resolve to stay strong, her hands began to shake. Dawn. She had known her trial was a farce, known the charges against her were lies, invented by people with more power than conscience. But hearing the sentence spoken aloud by the king himself made it suddenly, terribly real. "Then why are you here?" she asked, forcing the words past the tightness in her throat. "Come to watch me suffer before you finish the job." Damien's expression cracked, just slightly, and for the first time, she saw something almost human beneath the crown and the title. He looked down at his own hands, as though they did not quite belong to him. "I don't know why I'm here," he admitted, and the honesty in his voice startled her more than any threat could have. "Something pulled me down these stairs, something I don't understand." Before she could respond, a low growl rumbled from somewhere deep inside his chest, though his lips never moved. Alara's eyes widened. She had heard stories about the Alpha Kings, about the wolves that lived inside them, ancient and powerful, bonded to their human halves since birth. She had always thought the stories were exaggerated. Now she was not so sure. "Your wolf," she said slowly. "It's reacting to me." Damien's eyes snapped to hers, startled that she understood so quickly. "You know of the old ways?" "My grandmother told me stories," she said, "about alphas and their mates, about bonds no crown could break." The word mates hung in the air between them like smoke. Damien rose to his feet abruptly, putting distance between them, as though the closeness had become dangerous. He paced the small cell, one hand raking through his dark hair. "That is not possible," he said, more to himself than to her. "You are human. I am promised to another. This cannot be what it feels like." "What does it feel like?" Alara asked, curiosity briefly overpowering her fear. He stopped pacing and looked at her, and this time, he did not hide the confusion in his eyes. "Like my chest is on fire. Like every instinct I have is screaming at me to protect you, to free you, to never leave this room without you." He shook his head, as though trying to dislodge the thought. "I command an army. I rule a kingdom, and yet I cannot silence a wolf that has decided, without my permission, that you belong to me." Alara wrapped her arms around herself, unsure whether to feel hope or dread. If what he said was true, if some ancient bond had chosen her as his mate, it changed nothing about her situation. She was still a prisoner. He was still a king, with a throne to protect, and a kingdom that would never accept a human, especially one condemned to die, standing beside him. "It doesn't matter what your wolf wants," she said quietly. "Dawn is still coming." Damien's expression hardened with new resolve. He crossed the cell in 2 strides and knelt before her again, closer this time, close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from him despite the freezing dungeon air. "Not if I say otherwise," he said. "You would risk your throne for a stranger?" "I don't know you," he agreed, "but my wolf does, and I have learned, the hard way, that ignoring what he knows has never once ended well for me." Footsteps echoed from the staircase above, faster this time, urgent. A guard appeared at the cell door, breathless. "Your Majesty, the council has gathered. They are asking why you left the throne room so suddenly." Damien did not look away from Alara. "Tell them I am dealing with a matter of great importance. They said if you do not come immediately, they will assume the worst about the execution proceeding as scheduled." A muscle in Damien's jaw ticked. He rose slowly, his eyes never leaving Alara's face, as though committing every detail of it to memory. "Move her to the East Tower," he ordered the guard. "Under my personal protection, no one touches her without my direct command." The guard hesitated. "Your Majesty, the council will ask questions." "Then let them ask," Damien said, his voice carrying the full weight of his crown for the first time since he had entered the cell. "I am still king, my word is still law, and I have decided this woman does not die at dawn." Alara watched him turn to leave, torchlight catching the silver thread of his cloak one last time, before he disappeared up the stairs. Her whole body trembled, not entirely from fear this time. Something had shifted in that cell, something she did not fully understand and was not sure she wanted to. A king had walked into her prison, prepared to let her die, and walked out, prepared to defy his entire kingdom to keep her alive. She did not know if that made her lucky, or simply doomed, in a new and more complicated way. The guard who remained behind studied her with open suspicion as 2 others arrived to unlock her chains. Her wrists, raw and bruised from the metal cuffs, ached as blood rushed back into her hands. She stumbled when they pulled her upright, her legs weak from days of near starvation, but she refused to let them see her fall. They led her up a long spiral staircase, farther than she had walked in over a week. Each step sent fire through her muscles, but she forced herself forward, unwilling to be carried like a broken thing through the halls of the palace that had sentenced her to death only hours earlier. The East Tower was nothing like the dungeon. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, and the air smelled of clean linen instead of mold and fear. A guard opened a heavy wooden door and gestured for her to enter. Inside was a modest room with a real bed, a basin of water, and a small table set with bread and fruit. "The king's orders," the guard said gruffly, before shutting the door and locking it from the outside. Alara stood in the center of the room for a long moment, unsure if this was real or some cruel trick designed to make her execution feel like an even greater betrayal when it finally came. She approached the window slowly and looked out over the kingdom, spires and rooftops stretching toward distant mountains, smoke curling from chimneys in the city below. She thought of her grandmother's stories again, tales told by firelight about wolves who could sense their true mates the moment their eyes met, bonds so powerful they could bend kings to their will. She had always thought them beautiful, impossible fairy tales meant to comfort children on cold nights. Now she wondered if she was living inside one, and if fairy tales, even the beautiful ones, always came with a price. Down in the throne room, Damien faced a council already simmering with unrest. His advisor, Roth, a broad-shouldered man with cold, calculating eyes, stood at the head of the assembled elders, arms crossed over his chest. "You canceled an execution the entire kingdom witnessed being sentenced," Roth said, his voice carrying just enough respect to avoid outright insolence. "Care to explain why, Your Majesty?" Damien met his gaze evenly, refusing to let the older man see how unsettled he still felt. The evidence against the prisoner was insufficient. "I will not have innocent blood on this throne." The evidence was approved by this very council, Roth pressed. Are you suggesting we made an error in judgment? I am suggesting, Damien said, his voice dropping into something colder, more commanding, that the final word on matters of life and death in this kingdom belongs to the king, and I have made mine. The room fell silent, tension crackling in the air like static before lightning. Damien could feel his wolf pacing beneath his skin, restless and alert, as though it too sensed the danger gathering around them. Danger that had nothing to do with politics, and everything to do with the girl locked safely in the East Tower. He did not yet know how right his instincts were. As the council reluctantly dispersed, murmuring amongst themselves, Roth lingered behind, watching Damien with an expression that was difficult to read. There was something calculating in the older man's stillness, something that made the hair on the back of Damien's neck rise, though he could not say exactly why. Be careful, Your Majesty, Roth said finally, his tone deceptively mild. A king who acts on instinct instead of law invites chaos into his kingdom. And a king who ignores his instincts invites something far worse, Damien replied. Roth's lips curved into a thin, unreadable smile before he bowed and left the throne room. Damien stood alone for a long moment beneath the high stone arches, the weight of his crown suddenly heavier than it had ever felt before. Somewhere above him, in the East Tower, a woman he barely knew was resting in a bed his own hands had ordered prepared, and his wolf had never once stopped humming with quiet, unshakable certainty. He had spent his entire life being told that duty came before desire, that a king belonged to his kingdom before he belonged to himself. But standing there, with the ghost of gold-flecked eyes still burning behind his own, Damien began to wonder, for the very first time, if some bonds were simply older and stronger than any crown. Outside, the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. Somewhere in the palace, whispers had already begun to spread, servants and soldiers alike murmuring about the king's strange behavior, about the human prisoner spared at the final hour, about the storm that seemed to be gathering just beneath the surface of a kingdom that had, until today, known only peace. Neither Damien nor Alara could yet see how far that storm would reach, or how many lives it would change before it finally broke. But high in the East Tower, as Alara finally allowed herself to lie down on a real bed for the first time in 11 days, she could not shake the feeling that her execution had been cancelled, but her danger had only just begun. Morning light woke Alara before any guard did. For a moment she forgot where she was, and her body braced for cold stone and iron chains. Instead, her hand met soft blankets, and sunlight warmed her face through a real window. She sat up quickly, heart hammering, half convinced the comfort around her was about to be snatched away. The door was still locked from the outside, but a tray of fresh bread, cheese, and warm tea had been left on the small table sometime while she slept. She stared at it for a long moment before hunger won out over suspicion. She ate slowly, savoring each bite after days of near starvation, and tried to piece together what had happened the night before. A king had walked into her cell, prepared to let her die. Then something in his eyes had changed, something he called a bond, and everything had shifted. She touched her own chest absently, wondering if she was supposed to feel anything unusual, any pull or fire like the one he described. She felt only exhaustion, hunger, and a deep gnawing fear that this kindness would not last. Down in the throne room, Damien had not slept at all. He stood at the window of his private study overlooking the city, still wearing yesterday's cloak, his mind a battlefield of instinct and duty. His wolf had been unusually quiet since dawn, but the quiet did not feel peaceful. It felt like a held breath, waiting for the next danger to appear. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. His personal healer, an elderly woman named Bryn who had served 3 generations of Ashgrove kings, entered without waiting for permission, as was her long-standing privilege. "You look like a man who has seen a ghost," Bryn said, studying him with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Perhaps I have," Damien replied. "Or perhaps I have simply lost my mind." Bryn set down her bag of herbs and remedies and crossed her arms. "Tell me." Damien hesitated only a moment before the words spilled out, faster than he intended. He told her about the pull in the dungeon, the fire in his chest, the way his wolf had recognized the prisoner as something far more significant than a stranger condemned to death. Bryn listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with every word. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, studying him the way she used to when he was a boy, pretending an injury did not hurt. "You already know what this is," she said finally. "You are simply afraid to say it aloud." "Say it for me then." "A mate bond," Bryn said plainly. "The kind spoken of in the oldest histories, before crowns and treaties complicated everything a wolf once understood instinctively. Your wolf has chosen her, Damien, and wolves do not choose lightly, nor do they choose wrongly." Damien turned back toward the window, jaw tight. "I am promised to Princess Isolde. The alliance with the Silverfang pack depends on that promise. If I break it, I risk war between our territories. And if you ignore the bond," Bryn said quietly, "you risk something far worse." "A wolf denied its mate does not simply forget, Damien. It withers. I have seen it happen to alphas before you, men who chose duty over their bonded mate, and spent the rest of their lives as hollow shadows of who they once were." The words settled over him like a physical weight. He had heard stories, whispered warnings from older members of the pack, about alphas who had ignored their bonds. But he had always assumed those stories were exaggerated, meant to frighten young wolves into taking their instincts seriously. He was beginning to suspect they were not exaggerations at all. "What would you have me do?" he asked. "Break a promise made to an entire pack, to pursue a bond with a woman I have known for less than a day?" Bryn's expression softened slightly. "I am not telling you what to do, Damien. I am telling you what is true. What you do with that truth is a decision only you can make." She left him alone with his thoughts, and for a long while, Damien simply stood at the window, watching the city wake beneath him. Merchants opening their shops, children running through the streets, life continuing, as though the world had not just shifted beneath his feet. He thought of Alara's steady voice in the dungeon, refusing to beg even when she believed she had only hours left to live. He thought of the fire in his chest when their eyes had first met, a sensation so foreign and overwhelming that he still did not have words adequate to describe it. And he thought of Princess Isolde, a woman he barely knew beyond formal letters and diplomatic visits, whose kingdom's peace now rested on a promise made before he understood what a true bond actually felt like. There were no easy answers waiting for him, only a growing certainty that whatever he chose, someone would be hurt by it. By midday, Damien could no longer stay away. He made his way to the East Tower, under the pretense of continuing his interrogation of the prisoner, though both he and the guards stationed outside her door understood it was little more than a convenient excuse. When he entered, Alara was standing by the window, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, looking healthier than she had the night before but still fragile, in a way that made something in his chest tighten painfully. "Have you come to interrogate me again?" she asked without turning around. "I came to see how you were healing," he admitted. She turned then, studying him with the same careful wariness she had shown in the dungeon. "You didn't answer my question yesterday. About what happens now." Damien crossed the room slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. "My healer confirmed what my wolf already knew. You are my mate, Alara, bonded to me in a way that predates crowns, treaties, and every political arrangement my council has ever made." Alara's breath caught, and she wrapped her arms around herself instinctively, as though the words themselves carried physical weight. "I don't understand what that means for someone like me." "Neither do I, entirely," Damien admitted. "I have never faced this situation before. No king, in 3 generations of my family, has faced this exact situation. Then what happens to the crime I was accused of? To the execution you canceled? Do those simply disappear because your wolf has decided it wants something?" Her sharpness caught him off guard, though he found himself oddly grateful for it. She was not the kind of woman who would simply accept comfort and safety without questioning the price attached to it, and something about that honesty steadied him more than he expected. "I intend to reopen the investigation into the charges against you," he said. "Properly this time, without the influence of whoever framed you in the first place. If you are innocent, and I believe you are, the truth will protect you far better than my authority alone ever could. And if the truth makes powerful people uncomfortable?" Damien's expression hardened slightly. "Then those people will discover that discomfort is a small price to pay for justice in my kingdom." For the first time since they had met, something like the beginning of trust flickered across Alara's face. It was small, fragile, easily broken, but it was there, and Damien found himself unwilling to do anything that might extinguish it. "Tell me what happened," he said gently. "Tell me who accused you, and why." Alara hesitated, old fear rising in her throat, but something about the steady certainty in his gold-flecked eyes convinced her that this time, someone might actually listen. She took a slow breath and began to speak, describing the night soldiers had dragged her from her home, the false accusations of theft leveled against her by a noble family with far more to hide than she did, and the trial that had lasted less than an hour before condemning her to death. Damien listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every detail, his wolf rumbling low and dangerous beneath his skin at the injustice she described. By the time she finished, he had made a silent vow to himself that whoever had orchestrated her suffering would answer for it, regardless of their standing within his court. "I will find the truth," he promised, "and I will make certain it is heard." Alara studied him for a long moment, searching his face for the deception she had learned to expect from powerful men. She found none, only quiet determination, and something warmer beneath it that she was not yet ready to name. "Why does this matter so much to you?" she asked softly. "I am a stranger, a prisoner. You could simply let the original sentence stand and avoid all of this complication." Damien's jaw tightened, and when he spoke, his voice carried a rawness she had not heard from him before. "Because my wolf chose you before I understood why, and because the more I learn about you, the more I understand exactly what he saw. You did not beg for your life, even facing death. You question everything, including me, even when it would be easier to simply accept whatever comfort I offer. That kind of strength is rare, Alara. Rarer still, in a kingdom full of people who tell me only what they think I want to hear." The sincerity in his words settled over her like warmth after a long cold night. She did not know what to do with it, did not know if she was ready to trust it completely, but for the first time since soldiers had dragged her from her home, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps her story would not end in the dungeon after all. Outside the tower, unseen by either of them, a figure lingered in the shadow of a stone archway, watching the window with cold, calculating patience. Roth had followed Damien from the throne room, curious about the king's sudden and uncharacteristic behavior, and what he had overheard through the partially open window confirmed suspicions he had been quietly nursing since the previous night. The king had found his mate, and she was human, condemned, and utterly unsuitable for a throne that depended on an alliance with the Silverfang pack. Roth allowed himself a slow, thin smile as he turned away from the tower, already calculating how this unexpected complication might be turned to his advantage. A kingdom destabilized by its own king's reckless heart was a kingdom ripe for a new kind of leadership, and Roth had waited a very long time for an opportunity exactly like this one. He descended the stairs quietly, already composing the letter he intended to send to the Silverfang pack that very evening, a letter that would ensure Princess Isolde arrived far sooner than anyone in the palace currently expected, and far better informed about the king's divided heart than Damien would have liked. The storm Damien had sensed gathering the night before was no longer simply gathering. It had begun to move, and neither he nor Alara yet understood how quickly it was approaching, or how many carefully guarded secrets it would expose, before it finally broke over the kingdom entirely. 3 days passed before Damien returned to the East Tower with news. In that time, Alara had regained much of her strength, though the memory of iron chains still made her flinch whenever a door closed too loudly. She had spent the hours pacing the small room, watching the city below, and wondering how much of her fragile new safety was real, and how much would vanish the moment the king's attention wandered elsewhere. When Damien entered, his expression told her everything before he spoke a single word. Something had gone wrong. "What is it?" she asked, rising from where she had been sitting near the window. "I sent trusted men to investigate the merchant family who accused you," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Their warehouse records show significant losses in imported silk over the past several months, losses that match almost exactly to the amount you were accused of stealing." Alara's stomach twisted. "So they lied. I knew they lied." "There is more," Damien continued. "The losses were not caused by theft at all. They were caused by an illegal smuggling arrangement the family orchestrated themselves, selling goods outside official trade channels to avoid taxation. When an internal audit threatened to expose them, they needed someone to blame quickly, someone with no standing or connections to defend themselves. Someone like me." Ilara said quietly. Someone like you, he confirmed, his jaw tight with restrained fury. A servant girl, with no family in the city, no allies among the nobility, and no way to prove her innocence against accusations, backed by wealth and influence. Ilara sank back down onto the edge of the bed, her hands trembling slightly as the full weight of what had nearly happened settled over her. She had come within hours of execution for a crime committed entirely by the people who accused her, simply because she was convenient and powerless. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I bring formal charges against the family responsible," Damien said. "The evidence is clear enough that even my most stubborn council members will struggle to argue against it. You will be publicly cleared of all charges, and those who framed you will face justice for both the smuggling and the false accusation that nearly cost you your life." Relief washed over her, so sudden and overwhelming that tears she had refused to shed, even in the dungeon, finally began to fall. Damien crossed the room instinctively, kneeling before her the way he had that first night, though this time the distance between them felt different, less like a king addressing a prisoner, and more like something else entirely. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have nothing to thank me for," he said gently. "I am simply correcting an injustice that should never have happened in the first place." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for the calculation she had learned to expect from powerful men, the hidden motive beneath every act of apparent kindness. She found none, only quiet sincerity and something warmer beneath it that made her chest ache in a way she did not fully understand. "Tell me about your life," Damien said suddenly, surprising them both with the question. "Before the accusations, before any of this happened." Ilara wiped her eyes and managed a small, wavering smile. "There isn't much to tell. My parents died when I was young, taken by a fever that swept through our village. My grandmother raised me after that, taught me everything she knew about herbs and healing, told me stories by the fire about wolves and mates, and bonds that could bend even kings to their will." She laughed softly, the sound rusty from disuse. "I never imagined I would live inside one of those stories." "What happened to your grandmother?" "She passed 2 winters ago," Ilara said, her voice growing quiet. "I came to the city afterward, looking for work. I found a position as a servant in the merchant family's household, cleaning and cooking, in exchange for a small wage and a place to sleep. I thought I had found some measure of stability, at least. Until they needed someone to blame for their own crimes. Until then, yes." Damien reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and gently took her hand in his. The contact sent a jolt of warmth through both of them, a physical confirmation of the bond neither could fully deny any longer, no matter how complicated the circumstances surrounding it remained. "I am sorry for everything you have endured," he said. "But I promise you, from this moment forward, no one in this kingdom will treat you as disposable again." Ilara looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers curled protectively around hers, and felt something inside her chest loosen slightly. A tension she had carried for so long, she had almost forgotten what it felt like to exist without it. "Your council will not accept this easily," she said. "A human mate, especially one so recently accused of a crime, even a false one. They will see me as a liability, a threat to whatever alliance they had planned for you." Damien's expression grew serious. "You already know about Princess Isolde. Servants hear everything, even locked in a tower," she said with a faint, humorless smile. "I know your council expects you to marry her. I know an alliance between your pack and the Silverfang territory depends on that promise, and I know that whatever this bond means, it complicates everything they have worked to arrange." "It does," Damien admitted. "I do not yet know how to resolve that complication. I only know that ignoring what my wolf has already chosen is not a solution I am willing to accept, regardless of the political cost." Ilara studied him for a long moment, weighing the sincerity in his voice against the impossible weight of what he was suggesting. A king willing to risk war, willing to defy his own council, for a bond only days old with a woman who, until recently, had been sentenced to die by his own court. "You barely know me," she said softly. "I know enough," he replied. "I know you did not beg, even facing death. I know you question everything, including me, rather than simply accepting comfort at face value. I know my wolf has never once wavered since the moment he recognized you, and I have learned, often painfully, that ignoring what he knows has never served me well. The sincerity in his voice, combined with the warmth still radiating from his hand around hers, made it increasingly difficult for Alara to maintain the careful distance she had promised herself she would keep. She had spent her entire life learning not to trust powerful men, learning that kindness from those with authority often came with hidden costs. But something about Damien felt different, felt real, in a way she had not expected, and was not entirely prepared for. I need time, she admitted finally, to understand what any of this means, to trust that it is real, and not simply the product of a bond neither of us fully understands yet. Take whatever time you need, Damien said, releasing her hand gently, though the loss of contact left both of them feeling strangely incomplete. I will not force anything you are not ready for. My wolf may have already chosen, but I refuse to let instinct override your own right to choose as well. His words settled over her like a promise, one she desperately wanted to believe. As he rose to leave, pausing at the door to look back at her one final time, Alara found herself hoping, cautiously, and against every instinct her difficult life had taught her, that this particular promise might actually be one worth trusting. Neither of them noticed the servant girl lingering near the tower entrance, listening carefully to every word that drifted through the partially open door. She was young, new to the palace staff, and desperately in need of the coin Roth had promised her in exchange for information about the king's activities in the East Tower. By nightfall, Roth possessed a detailed account of everything discussed between Damien and Alara that afternoon, including the king's growing certainty about the bond and his refusal to abandon it regardless of political consequence. Roth read the servant's report twice by candlelight, his expression darkening with each careful word. The letter to the Silverfang pack had already been sent. Princess Isolde would arrive within the fortnight, fully expecting to finalize the betrothal her own father had negotiated years earlier. What Roth had not yet decided was exactly how much the princess needed to know about the king's divided heart, and how that knowledge might be shaped to serve purposes far beyond simple diplomatic courtesy. A kingdom balanced precariously between duty and desire was a kingdom vulnerable to those patient enough to exploit the difference, and Roth intended to be exactly that patient, waiting for the perfect moment to ensure that whatever choice Damien ultimately made, it would be Roth himself who benefited most from the fallout. The council chamber was already full when Damien arrived, every elder seated around the long stone table with expressions ranging from concern to open hostility. Word of the merchant family's crimes had spread quickly through the palace, along with quieter, more dangerous rumors about the king's growing attachment to the servant girl he had spared from execution. Roth stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, waiting with the patient stillness of a man who already knew exactly how this meeting would unfold. "Your Majesty," Roth said as Damien took his seat at the head of the table, "the council has reviewed the evidence you presented regarding the merchant family's smuggling operation. We agree the charges against them are substantial, and the false accusation against the servant girl appears credible." "Then you agree she should be formally cleared," Damien said. "We do," Roth confirmed. "That matter is not in question. What concerns this council, Your Majesty, is the nature of your continued involvement with her, well beyond what justice alone requires." A murmur rippled around the table, several elders nodding in quiet agreement. Damien felt his wolf stir beneath his skin, sensing the shift in the room's mood, the careful trap being laid beneath the polite formality of council procedure. "My involvement is a private matter," Damien said evenly. "With respect, Your Majesty, nothing involving the Alpha King is entirely private," an elder named Corwin interjected, his voice thin with age but sharp with concern. "Especially not when the Silverfang Pack's alliance depends on your betrothal to Princess Isolde, an arrangement negotiated over 3 years and intended to secure peace along our shared border." "I am aware of the arrangement," Damien said, his voice tightening. "Then you are also aware," Roth continued smoothly, "that any hint of divided loyalty on your part could be interpreted by the Silverfang Pack as an insult, potentially unraveling years of careful diplomacy. Border territories that have known peace for over a decade could once again find themselves vulnerable to conflict." Damien's jaw tightened, frustration and something close to desperation warring within him. He had known this confrontation was coming, had spent sleepless nights preparing arguments to defend a bond he barely understood himself. But hearing his counsel lay out the political stakes so plainly made the weight of his position feel suddenly, crushingly real. "What would you have me do?" he asked, his voice quieter now, though no less firm. "Ignore a mate bond confirmed by my own healer? Abandon what my wolf has already chosen, simply because the timing proves politically inconvenient?" Silence fell over the chamber, heavy and uncomfortable. Several elders exchanged uneasy glances, clearly reluctant to argue against something as sacred within pack tradition as a confirmed mate bond, yet equally unwilling to risk the alliance their kingdom's stability depended upon. Roth, however, showed no such hesitation. "With respect, Your Majesty, mate bonds have been set aside before, when circumstances demanded it. Your own grandfather postponed acknowledging his bonded mate for nearly 2 years, while securing a critical alliance with the Eastern Territories. The kingdom survived. The bond survived. Perhaps yours can as well." "My grandfather's mate was a noblewoman from an allied pack," Damien countered, his voice rising slightly. "Ilara is a human servant this council itself nearly executed on false charges. The circumstances are hardly comparable." "Precisely my concern," Roth said, his tone deceptively gentle, even as his words carried unmistakable edge. "A human mate carries no political weight, no alliance value, no standing among the packs whose support this throne depends upon. I do not say this to diminish her as a person, Your Majesty, only to acknowledge the practical reality of what claiming her publicly would mean for your kingdom's stability." Damien's wolf surged violently beneath his skin at the casual dismissal in Roth's words, and it took every ounce of control he possessed to keep his voice level. "Her worth is not measured by political usefulness, Roth. None of our worth should be." "A noble sentiment," Roth replied smoothly. "One I suspect will prove far more difficult to maintain once border skirmishes begin along the Silverfang territory. Once soldiers start dying because an insulted princess convinced her father that peace was no longer worth honoring." The threat, though carefully wrapped in diplomatic language, landed exactly as Roth intended. Several elders around the table nodded grimly, clearly persuaded by the practical argument, even if their sympathies leaned toward acknowledging the bond's legitimacy. Damien sat in tense silence for a long moment, feeling the full weight of the crown pressing down on him more heavily than it ever had before. He thought of Ilara in the East Tower, of her careful trust still forming, still fragile enough to shatter under the wrong pressure. He thought of his wolf's unwavering certainty, a certainty that had never once failed him in matters of instinct and survival. And he thought of the kingdom itself, of the ordinary people who would suffer most if political tensions along the border escalated into open conflict. "I will not abandon the bond," he said finally, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. "But I am not prepared to declare it publicly either, not until I understand the full scope of what protecting it will require, both for Ilara's safety and for this kingdom's stability." It was not the answer Roth had hoped for, but it was enough of a concession to placate the more cautious members of the council for the moment. Corwin nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his aged shoulders. "A reasonable compromise, Your Majesty," he said. "Perhaps time will reveal a path forward that satisfies both duty and instinct." Roth said nothing, though the thin, calculating smile that briefly crossed his face suggested he had already anticipated this outcome and planned accordingly. As the council meeting drew to a close and elders filed out of the chamber, murmuring quietly amongst themselves, Roth lingered behind once more, watching Damien with an expression that was difficult to read. "You are playing a dangerous game, Your Majesty," he said quietly, once the chamber had emptied. "Delaying a decision rarely satisfies anyone, least of all a princess, who will soon arrive, expecting a betrothal her father has spent years securing. I am aware of the risks, Roth. Are you?" Roth's eyes glinted with something that might have been genuine concern, or might have been something far more calculating. "Because from where I stand, Your Majesty, it appears you are risking everything, your throne, your kingdom's stability, even your own wolf's well-being, for a bond that is, by your own admission, only days old." Damien met his advisor's gaze steadily, refusing to let the man see how deeply the words had landed. "My wolf has never once misled me, Roth, not in matters far less significant than this one." "Let us hope that remains true," Roth said, bowing slightly, before turning to leave the chamber. For all our sakes. Alone in the empty council chamber, Damien allowed himself a rare moment of uncertainty, running both hands through his hair, as the full weight of the impossible choice before him settled over his shoulders. He did not regret refusing to abandon the bond, could not imagine ever regretting that decision, but the path forward remained shrouded in uncertainty, every option carrying consequences he was not yet prepared to fully calculate. He made his way back to the East Tower as evening fell, needing, more than he cared to admit even to himself, the quiet steadiness Elara's presence seemed to provide amid the chaos surrounding him. When he entered her room, she was seated near the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. "You look troubled," she observed, studying his face carefully as he crossed the room. "The council is concerned about the political implications of our bond," he admitted, choosing honesty over comfortable deflection, "specifically regarding my betrothal to Princess Isolde and the alliance her marriage would secure." Elara's expression grew guarded, old fears resurfacing beneath her careful composure. "And what did you decide?" "That I will not abandon what my wolf has chosen," Damien said firmly, "but that I must also find a way to protect this kingdom's stability while doing so. The path forward is not yet clear to me, Elara, but I promise you, I am not searching for a way out of this bond. I am searching for a way to honor it without plunging my kingdom into unnecessary conflict." Elara studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any hint of hesitation or hidden reservation. Finding none, she allowed herself to relax slightly, though the weight of everything he had described continued to settle heavily over her thoughts. "Princess Isolde," she said quietly. "What is she like?" "I do not know her well," Damien admitted. "We have exchanged formal letters, met briefly during diplomatic visits. She always struck me as intelligent, composed, dedicated to her people's welfare. I never imagined circumstances would place us in direct conflict over something as personal as a mate bond. She may not welcome the news well," Elara said. "No," Damien agreed grimly. "She likely will not." Neither of them could yet know exactly how right that assessment would prove, or how quickly the princess's arrival would transform the delicate balance they had only just begun to establish into something far more dangerous than either had anticipated. Word of the king's continued visits to the East Tower spread through the palace like smoke through dry grass, quiet at first, then impossible to contain. Servants whispered in kitchens and corridors, guards exchanged knowing glances during shift changes, and within days, even the merchants in the city below had begun murmuring rumors about a mysterious woman who had captured the Alpha King's attention. Damien tried to ignore the growing speculation, focusing instead on strengthening the formal case against the merchant family who had framed Elara, ensuring her innocence would be established beyond any possible doubt before the wider kingdom learned her name. But ignoring rumors proved far easier in theory than in practice, especially once Roth began quietly encouraging their spread rather than working to contain them. Roth understood, better than most, the value of a story allowed to grow wild and uncontrolled. A king secretly favoring an unsuitable mate over his promised alliance made for compelling gossip, the kind that traveled quickly and gathered embellishment with every retelling. By the time such stories reached Princess Isolde's ears, whether through official correspondence or informal channels Roth had quietly cultivated, they would carry far more weight than any careful diplomatic explanation Damien might later attempt to offer. Late one evening, Roth met privately with a small group of council members who shared his concerns about the kingdom's stability. Men who trusted his judgment and had no reason to suspect his motives extended beyond simple loyalty to the crown's best interests. "The king grows more reckless by the day," Roth said, his voice carrying practiced concern. "If Princess Isolde arrives to discover the truth without proper preparation, the insult could prove severe enough to shatter the alliance entirely." "What do you propose?" asked one of the elders, a cautious man named Garrett, who had served on the council for over 2 decades. "Only that we ensure the princess understands the situation fully, before her arrival," Roth said. "Better she learns the truth from a controlled source than stumbles upon it through palace gossip, drawing her own conclusions about the king's character and intentions." The elders nodded slowly, finding reasonable logic in Roth's careful framing, unaware that the letter Roth had already sent contained far more inflammatory detail than simple factual preparation required. Roth had crafted his message with deliberate precision, emphasizing the king's apparent disregard for the alliance, while minimizing any mention of the servant girl's innocence or the genuine nature of the confirmed mate bond. His goal was not to prepare the princess fairly. It was to ensure her arrival came already colored by suspicion and resentment, conditions far more favorable to the outcome Roth privately hoped to engineer. Meanwhile, in the East Tower, Elara had begun venturing beyond her room for the first time, accompanied always by a guard but permitted, at Damien's insistence, to walk the palace gardens during daylight hours. The fresh air and open sky did wonders for her recovering strength, and slowly, cautiously, something resembling normalcy began returning to her days. She was walking along a quiet garden path one afternoon when she encountered Bryn, the elderly healer, tending carefully to a bed of medicinal herbs near the garden's edge. The older woman looked up as Elara approached, studying her with the same sharp, assessing gaze she had once turned on Damien. "You must be the young woman who has turned this entire palace upside down," Bryn said, though her tone carried more curiosity than judgment. Elara managed a small, wry smile. "I suppose that description fits, unfortunately." "Sit," Bryn said, gesturing to a stone bench nearby. "I have wanted to meet you properly, since I confirmed the bond myself." Elara sat cautiously, still unaccustomed to genuine warmth from anyone within the palace walls beyond Damien himself. "You are the healer who confirmed it." "I am," Bryn said, settling onto the bench beside her, with the ease of long familiarity with the garden. "I have served this royal family for over 30 years, Elara. I watched Damien grow from a boy, uncertain of his own wolf, into the king he is today. I have never once seen his wolf react to anyone the way it reacted to you." "Is that meant to comfort me?" Elara asked. "Because it mostly terrifies me." Bryn's expression softened with understanding. "Bonds like yours are rare, child. Rarer still in times as politically complicated as these. It is natural to feel overwhelmed by circumstances so far beyond anything you could have anticipated. Everyone keeps telling me how rare and significant this bond is," Elara said, frustration creeping into her voice, despite her efforts to remain composed. "No one has told me what it means for someone like me, a servant with no standing, no family, no way to protect myself if this kingdom decides I am simply too inconvenient to keep alive." Bryn reached over and took Elara's hand, her grip surprisingly firm despite her advanced age. "It means, whether you feel ready for it or not, that you now matter to the most powerful man in this kingdom, in a way nothing else ever could. That is both a gift and a burden, Elara, and I will not pretend otherwise. But it also means you are no longer as powerless as you once believed yourself to be." The words settled over Elara slowly, and for the first time since arriving in the East Tower, she felt something shift inside her chest, a small but genuine flicker of hope, that perhaps her circumstances truly were changing, and not simply into another form of captivity, dressed in more comfortable clothing. "There are those within this palace," Bryn continued, her voice dropping slightly, "who will see your bond with Damien as an opportunity, rather than a threat, and others who will see it as precisely the opposite. I would advise you to trust carefully, Elara, and to remain alert, even within these walls that feel, for now, relatively safe." Something in the healer's tone sent a chill through Elara despite the warm afternoon sun. "Are you warning me about someone specific?" Bryn hesitated, glancing briefly toward the palace before answering. "I have served long enough to recognize ambition dressed as loyalty, child. I will say only that much, and trust you to remain watchful." Before Elara could press further, a guard approached along the garden path, informing her that the king had requested her presence in his private study. Bryn squeezed her hand one final time before releasing it. "Go carefully, Elara," she said, "and remember what I have told you." Elara made her way through the palace corridors, with Bryn's warning echoing uneasily in her thoughts, wondering exactly who among the council the healer had been so carefully avoiding naming, and what danger that unnamed threat might eventually pose to the fragile safety she had only just begun to trust. She found Damien in his study, poring over documents spread across his desk, his expression tight with concentration and barely restrained frustration. He looked up as she entered, and something in his features softened immediately at the sight of her. the tension in his shoulders easing slightly despite the evident stress of whatever he had been reviewing. "You wanted to see me," she said. "I did," he confirmed, gesturing for her to sit across from his desk. "I received word this morning. Princess Isolda's arrival has been moved forward. She will reach the palace within the week, rather than the fortnight originally planned." Ilara's stomach twisted with sudden unease. Why the sudden change? "I do not know," Damien admitted, frustration evident in his voice. Her letter offered no explanation, beyond a vague reference to matters requiring more urgent attention than originally anticipated. Ilara thought immediately of Bryn's careful warning in the garden, of ambition dressed as loyalty, and felt a cold certainty settle over her that the princess's accelerated arrival was no simple coincidence. "Someone told her," she said quietly. "Someone within your own council told her about the bond, before you were ready to explain it yourself." Damien's expression darkened, as the same suspicion clearly occurred to him. If that is true, then whoever did so acted directly against my explicit wishes, potentially endangering the very alliance they claimed to be protecting. "Or perhaps endangering it was exactly their intention," Ilara said, giving voice to the fear that had been building steadily since her conversation with Bryn. Damien met her gaze across the desk, and for a long moment neither spoke, both recognizing the same unsettling possibility taking shape between them. If someone within the palace was deliberately working to destabilize the fragile balance Damien had been trying so carefully to maintain, then the danger facing them both extended far beyond simple political inconvenience. It suggested, instead, a deliberate and calculated betrayal, orchestrated by someone with intimate access to the king's private decisions, and motives that had, until this very moment, remained carefully hidden beneath layers of apparent loyalty. Night settled over the palace, thick and unusually quiet, the kind of silence that made instincts sharpen without any clear cause. Damien had assigned additional guards to the East Tower following the unsettling conversation with Ilara that afternoon, though he could not yet explain to anyone, including himself, exactly what danger he expected them to guard against. His wolf, however, seemed to know something he did not. It had grown increasingly restless as evening deepened into night, pacing beneath his skin with an urgency that made concentration on anything else nearly impossible. Damien paced his own study for over an hour, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, before finally abandoning any pretense of patience and making his way toward the East Tower himself. He was halfway across the palace's central courtyard when a scream shattered the night's stillness, sharp and unmistakably Ilara's voice, carrying from somewhere above in the direction of the East Tower. Damien did not remember crossing the remaining distance. His wolf surged forward with a speed that left rational thought entirely behind, instinct alone guiding him up the spiral staircase 2 steps at a time, his heart pounding, with a fear more intense than anything he had experienced in years of leading his kingdom. He reached the tower room to find the door already forced open, wood splintered around the lock, and 2 figures struggling within. Ilara had backed herself against the far wall, a heavy candlestick clutched defensively in both hands, facing a hooded intruder who was advancing toward her with slow, deliberate menace. Damien's wolf took over entirely before conscious thought could catch up, a low, dangerous growl tearing from his throat as he crossed the room in 3 powerful strides. The intruder turned at the sound, but not quickly enough. Damien seized the man by the collar of his cloak and slammed him against the stone wall with enough force to knock the breath from his lungs. "Guards!" Damien roared, his voice carrying an authority and rage that echoed through the entire tower. Footsteps thundered up the staircase as palace guards responded to the commotion, quickly securing the intruder while Damien turned immediately to Ilara, his hands trembling slightly as he checked her carefully for injury. She was shaking, pale, but unharmed, the candlestick still clutched tightly in her white-knuckled grip. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. "No," she managed, though her voice wavered noticeably. "He came through the door before I could call for help. I only had time to grab something to defend myself." Relief washed over Damien so intensely, it nearly buckled his knees, followed almost immediately by a fury so consuming it took considerable effort to keep his wolf from tearing the restrained intruder apart where he stood. He forced himself to breathe slowly, reminding himself that answers mattered more, in this moment, than immediate vengeance. "Who sent you?" Damien demanded, turning toward the captured intruder, who remained silent despite the guard's firm grip on his arms. The man said nothing, his expression carefully blank despite the obvious danger of his position. Damien crossed the room slowly, his wolf's presence radiating dangerously close to the surface, and crouched before the restrained figure with cold, deliberate menace. "You have exactly one opportunity to explain yourself before I decide you are no longer useful to keep alive," Damien said quietly, though the quiet carried far more threat than any shout could have managed. Something in the king's tone finally broke through the intruder's resolve. "I was paid," the man stammered. "A significant sum, delivered through an intermediary. I never met the person who hired me directly." "Paid to do what, precisely?" "To remove the girl," the man admitted, refusing to meet Damien's gaze. Quietly. "In a manner that would appear accidental or the result of her own attempted escape." Damien's wolf snarled audibly, and it took every ounce of control he possessed to keep from acting entirely on instinct in that moment. "Describe the intermediary, every detail you remember." The man provided what description he could, though it proved frustratingly vague. A cloaked figure who had met him in a tavern outside the palace walls, paid in coin rather than traceable currency, and offered no name beyond vague assurances that the payment came from someone with significant influence within the palace itself. It was not enough to identify a specific culprit with certainty, but it was more than enough to confirm what both Damien and Alara had already begun to suspect. Someone within the palace, someone with resources and motive enough to arrange a paid assassination, viewed Alara as a threat significant enough to warrant her death. "Take him to the dungeon," Damien ordered the guards, "under heavy watch. I want him questioned further at first light, and I want to know immediately if he remembers any additional details." As the guards escorted the shaken intruder from the tower, Damien turned back to Alara, who had finally lowered the candlestick, though her hands still trembled visibly with the fading adrenaline of the encounter. He crossed the room and gathered her carefully into his arms, and this time, she did not pull away, allowing herself the comfort of his solid warmth after the terrifying uncertainty of the past several minutes. "I should have doubled the guard sooner," Damien said, his voice tight with self-recrimination. "My wolf sensed something was wrong hours ago, and I did not act quickly enough." "You came," Alara said quietly, her face pressed against his chest. "That is what matters." "It is not enough," Damien said firmly, pulling back slightly to meet her eyes. "Someone within my own palace arranged for your death, Alara, and I intend to discover exactly who, regardless of what that discovery might cost me." Alara studied his face, seeing the same cold determination she had witnessed the very first night he entered her dungeon cell, though now it carried an intensity born of genuine fear rather than simple curiosity. "You believe it was someone on your council?" "I believe it was someone with both the resources and the motive to view your existence as a threat to their own carefully laid plans," Damien said grimly. "And I intend to find out exactly who that person is before Princess Isolde arrives, regardless of what political complications that investigation might create." Alara nodded slowly, though the fear of the evening's attack still lingered heavily beneath her outward composure. "What happens now?" "Now," Damien said, his voice carrying renewed resolve, "you will be moved to my personal chambers, under my direct protection, where no assassin will find opportunity to reach you again. And I will begin an investigation that will not stop until I have identified every person involved in tonight's attempt on your life." He did not wait for her agreement, though she offered none in protest, understanding implicitly that whatever fragile safety the East Tower had once represented had been shattered entirely by tonight's attack. As Damien guided her carefully from the room, his arm remaining protectively around her shoulders throughout the walk through the palace's quiet corridors, neither of them noticed the figure watching from a shadowed alcove near the courtyard, patient and calculating despite tonight's failure. Roth had not expected the assassination attempt to succeed cleanly, had, in fact, anticipated failure as the more likely outcome, given the king's evident and growing protectiveness. But failure served its own useful purpose. It confirmed, beyond any remaining doubt, exactly how deeply Damien's instincts had bound him to the servant girl, information Roth intended to use carefully once Princess Isolde arrived, and the true confrontation over the kingdom's future finally began in earnest. He retreated quietly into the palace's darker corridors, already composing the careful narrative he would present when questioned about tonight's events. A narrative that would place blame conveniently elsewhere, while ensuring his own involvement remained buried beneath layers of plausible deniability that had served him well throughout years of careful political maneuvering. The storm gathering over the kingdom had finally broken, and Roth intended to ensure that when the dust settled, he alone would remain standing to claim whatever advantage the chaos ultimately provided. The royal procession from the Silverfang territory arrived beneath a sky heavy with gray clouds, banners of silver and deep blue snapping in the wind as carriages and mounted escorts made their way through the palace gates. Damien stood at the top of the entrance steps, dressed in formal attire befitting the occasion, his expression carefully composed despite the turmoil churning beneath the surface. Ilara watched from a high window overlooking the courtyard, having been asked, gently but firmly, to remain out of sight during the formal welcome. She understood the necessity, even as the request stung more than she cared to admit. Whatever existed between herself and Damien, however genuine and undeniable, remained fragile enough that a public misstep now could unravel weeks of careful, painful progress. Princess Isolde emerged from the lead carriage with practiced grace, her posture perfectly composed, her expression revealing nothing beyond polite formality, as she descended toward where Damien waited. She was tall, with striking pale hair pulled back in an elegant braid, and eyes the color of storm clouds that missed nothing, as they swept briefly across the assembled palace staff, before settling on Damien himself. "Your Majesty," she said, offering a formal curtsy as she reached the bottom of the steps. "It has been too long since our last meeting." "Princess Isolde," Damien replied, bowing appropriately. "Your journey was safe, I trust." "Uneventful," she confirmed, though something in her measured tone suggested careful restraint rather than genuine ease. "Though I confess, I received correspondence recently that made this particular visit feel considerably more urgent than originally planned." The pointed reference was not lost on Damien, who felt his composure tighten despite his best efforts to maintain diplomatic ease. "Perhaps we should discuss such matters privately, once you have had opportunity to rest from your journey." "Perhaps we should discuss them now," Isolde countered smoothly, though her expression remained perfectly polite. "I find delayed conversations rarely improve with additional waiting, Your Majesty." Something in her directness reminded Damien uncomfortably of Ilara's own refusal to accept comfortable evasion, and he found himself both wary and unexpectedly respectful of the princess's evident unwillingness to play diplomatic games she clearly recognized for exactly what they were. "Very well," he said. "My private study, then, once you have been shown to your quarters." Isolde nodded, allowing herself to be escorted inside by palace attendants, though her sharp eyes lingered a moment longer on Damien's face, clearly searching for confirmation of whatever information had prompted her accelerated arrival. An hour later, Damien met her in his private study, the same room where he had reviewed countless documents and made countless difficult decisions over recent weeks. Isolde entered with the same composed grace she had shown in the courtyard, though once the door closed behind her, some of that careful formality visibly eased. "I received a letter," she said without preamble, settling into the chair across from his desk, "from someone within your own council, describing a bond you have formed with a human woman, a former prisoner accused of theft before being cleared through your own intervention." Damien met her gaze steadily, deciding honesty served him far better than continued evasion. The letter's contents are accurate, though likely presented with considerable bias against her character. Isolde studied him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind her storm-colored eyes. "You do not deny it, then?" "I do not," Damien confirmed. "My wolf recognized her as my true mate the moment we met. I did not seek this bond, Princess. I did not choose it consciously, but I cannot deny it either, regardless of how inconvenient the timing proves for both our kingdoms." To his surprise, rather than anger or wounded pride, something that looked remarkably like relief crossed Isolde's composed features, before she quickly schooled her expression back into careful neutrality. "May I speak candidly?" she asked. "Please." "This betrothal was never my choice, Your Majesty," Isolde said, her voice quieter now, more genuine than the formal tone she had maintained since arriving. "My father arranged it years ago, believing an alliance secured through marriage would prove more durable than one secured through treaty alone. I have spent considerable time since preparing myself to honor an arrangement I never personally desired, out of duty to my people and respect for my father's judgment. Damien listened carefully, surprised by her honesty, and increasingly curious about where exactly this unexpected conversation might lead. When I received the letter about your bond, Isolde continued, my first reaction was not anger, Your Majesty, but something closer to hope. Hope that perhaps circumstances might finally provide a path away from an obligation I have long dreaded, without requiring either of us to bear the blame for abandoning our respective duties. You do not wish to marry me, Damien said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. I do not wish to marry anyone chosen for me by political necessity, Isolde clarified, a faint, wry smile touching her lips for the first time since her arrival. I have my own reasons for preferring a different path, reasons I am not yet prepared to share in full, but I assure you, Your Majesty, this news troubles me considerably less than my father's advisors likely anticipated when encouraging my urgent visit. Relief washed over Damien so intensely that he nearly laughed aloud, though he restrained himself, recognizing the conversation's continued seriousness despite this unexpected reprieve. Then perhaps we can find a solution that satisfies both our kingdom's need for continued peace, without requiring either of us to sacrifice what we truly want. Perhaps, Isolde agreed, though I suspect convincing our respective councils will prove considerably more difficult than convincing each other. My council already knows about the bond, Damien said. They remain deeply concerned about the alliance's stability, without our marriage securing it formally. Then we shall need to propose an alternative arrangement, Isolde said thoughtfully. A trade agreement, perhaps, or a formal treaty of mutual defense, something substantial enough to satisfy both councils that peace remains secured, without requiring either of us to marry against our genuine wishes. Damien studied the princess with newfound respect, recognizing in her the same sharp, practical intelligence that had first drawn him to consider her a worthy political partner, even without the romantic attachment either had ever genuinely felt toward the arrangement. I would welcome your assistance in crafting such a proposal, he said sincerely. You shall have it, Isolde confirmed. Though I confess, Your Majesty, I am curious to meet this woman, whose bond has apparently upended so many carefully laid political plans. Damien hesitated only briefly before nodding. I will arrange an introduction, once matters within my own council have settled somewhat further. There was an incident recently, an attempt on her life, that I believe originated from someone within my own court, someone deeply invested in seeing our betrothal proceed as originally planned. Isolde's expression sharpened with genuine concern. An assassination attempt, Your Majesty. This is far more serious than simple political maneuvering. I am aware, Damien said grimly, and I intend to discover exactly who orchestrated it, regardless of the political fallout that discovery might create. Then perhaps, Isolde said carefully, our alliance might prove useful in more ways than either of us originally anticipated. A princess wrongly informed and manipulated into urgent travel by someone within your own court is hardly a minor detail, Your Majesty. I suspect whoever authored that letter revealed rather more about their own motives than they likely intended. Damien considered her words carefully, recognizing the truth in them immediately. Roth had sent the letter, had orchestrated Isolde's accelerated arrival, presumably hoping to create exactly the kind of confrontation and political crisis that would force Damien's hand toward abandoning the bond entirely. Instead, that same manipulation had inadvertently revealed a level of involvement that placed Roth squarely at the center of suspicion regarding both the letter and the assassination attempt that followed. You may be right, Damien said slowly, new resolve hardening within him. And I believe I know exactly who deserves closer scrutiny in the days ahead. Isolde nodded, her expression settling into something resembling genuine partnership rather than simple diplomatic courtesy. Then let us proceed carefully, Your Majesty. Whoever orchestrated tonight's danger clearly possesses both resources and reach within your own palace. We would do well not to underestimate exactly how far they might be willing to go to see their plans succeed. Outside the study, unaware of the conversation unfolding within, Roth moved through the palace corridors with his usual measured confidence, already anticipating the confrontation he believed was about to unfold between an insulted princess and a king caught between duty and desire. He had no reason yet to suspect that his carefully laid plans had instead created an unexpected alliance between two people he had hoped to keep permanently divided, an alliance that would soon prove far more dangerous to his own ambitions than either had originally intended. The captured intruder proved more forthcoming after a night in the dungeon, fear overriding whatever loyalty his mysterious payment had originally purchased. Under careful questioning by Damien himself, accompanied by two of his most trusted guards, the man provided additional details that narrowed the search for his employer considerably. "The coin pouch," the man said, his voice hoarse from a sleepless night. "It bore a wax seal I did not recognize at first, but I have seen similar markings since, on correspondence delivered to the palace gates." "Describe the seal," Damien said, his patience thin despite his efforts to remain composed. "A wolf's head, encircled by thorny branches," the man said. "Smaller than the royal seal, but similar enough in style that I assumed it belonged to someone of significant standing within the court." Damien's blood ran cold with sudden recognition. The description matched exactly the personal seal Roth had used for decades, a mark Damien had seen countless times on council correspondence and private reports throughout his entire reign. The confirmation, while not entirely unexpected given recent suspicions, still landed with the weight of genuine betrayal. He left the dungeon without further explanation, his wolf simmering dangerously close to the surface as he made his way toward the council chambers, where Roth was known to conduct much of his daily business. Isolde intercepted him partway through the palace, having clearly sensed from his expression that something significant had occurred. "You found something," she said, falling into step beside him. "Confirmation," Damien said grimly. "The seal used to pay my mate's would-be assassin. Matches Roth's personal mark exactly." Isolde's expression hardened with genuine anger on Alara's behalf, despite having only just learned of the woman's existence. "Then we confront him immediately, before he has opportunity to cover his tracks further." "Agreed," Damien said, appreciating more with each passing hour the sharp, decisive intelligence that had somehow been wasted on a betrothal neither of them had genuinely wanted. They found Roth in the council chambers, reviewing correspondence with his usual calm efficiency, entirely unaware of the confrontation about to unfold. He looked up as Damien entered, Isolde close behind him, and something in their combined expressions immediately signaled that whatever conversation was coming would not proceed in his favor. "Your Majesty," Roth said carefully, rising from his seat. "Princess Isolde. To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "The assassin who attacked Alara has been questioned thoroughly," Damien said, his voice deceptively calm despite the fury barely contained beneath the surface. He described the seal used to authorize his payment in considerable detail. Roth. "A wolf's head encircled by thorny branches." Roth's carefully composed expression flickered, just briefly, before settling back into practiced neutrality. "A troubling description, Your Majesty, though hardly conclusive. Many nobles within this court employ similar heraldic imagery." "Not identical to your own personal seal," Damien said, his patience finally exhausted. "Do not insult my intelligence further, Roth. I want the truth, and I want it now, before I decide your continued freedom within this palace poses too great a risk to ignore." For a long, tense moment, Roth said nothing, his mind clearly working through calculations Damien could only guess at, weighing the value of continued denial against whatever alternative strategy remained available to him. Finally, something in his posture shifted, resignation settling over his features, as he seemed to recognize that further deception served no remaining purpose. "I did what I believed necessary to protect this kingdom's stability," Roth said, his voice carrying none of its earlier diplomatic warmth. "You were prepared to sacrifice years of careful alliance building for a bond formed over mere days, Your Majesty. Someone needed to act before your recklessness plunged this kingdom into unnecessary conflict. By ordering my mate's murder?" Damien's wolf surged forward with barely restrained fury, his voice dropping into something far more dangerous than his usual measured tone. "You call that protecting stability? I call it protecting a kingdom from a king too blinded by instinct to see the larger consequences of his choices," Roth said, though even he seemed to recognize the weakness of his own justification as the words left his mouth. "The alliance you claim to be protecting no longer requires my marriage to secure it," Isolde interjected sharply, stepping forward with evident anger. I came here prepared to discuss alternative arrangements, precisely because I never wanted this betrothal in the first place. Your entire scheme was built on assumptions you never bothered to verify, and it very nearly cost an innocent woman her life, for nothing more than your own misguided ambition. Roth's expression finally cracked entirely, something raw and desperate showing through his previously composed exterior. You do not understand the true stakes involved, Princess. This kingdom cannot afford instability, especially not instability born from a king's infatuation with a servant girl of no political consequence. Her consequence, Damien said, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority as king, is determined by my wolf's bond, not by your calculations of political usefulness. And your attempt to murder her, regardless of whatever justification you have constructed for yourself, constitutes treason against this crown. The word treason hung heavily in the air, and even Roth seemed to finally grasp the full severity of the situation he now faced. Guards summoned by Damien's earlier orders entered the chamber, prepared to take Roth into custody, though the older man made no attempt to resist, as the reality of his situation settled fully over him. Whatever you decide, Your Majesty, Roth said quietly as guards secured his arms, know that I acted out of genuine belief that I was protecting this kingdom, however flawed that belief may have ultimately proven. Genuine belief does not excuse attempted murder, Damien replied coldly. You will face formal judgment before this council, Roth, and whatever consequences that judgment determines appropriate. As guards led Roth from the chamber, the weight of what had just occurred settled heavily over the room. Isolde placed a hand briefly on Damien's shoulder, a gesture of genuine solidarity despite the unusual circumstances that had brought them together as unlikely allies rather than intended spouses. You handled that with considerable restraint, Your Majesty, she said, more than I likely would have managed, given similar circumstances. My wolf wanted considerably less restraint, Damien admitted, some of the tension finally beginning to ease from his shoulders now that the truth had been fully exposed. But Alara deserves justice, delivered properly, through this kingdom's laws, rather than through whatever violence my instincts might have preferred in that moment. A wise distinction, Isolde agreed. Now, I believe you have a mate waiting to hear that the threat against her has finally been resolved. Damien nodded, gratitude toward the princess's unexpected friendship settling warmly alongside the relief of Roth's exposure. He made his way quickly toward his private chambers, where Alara had remained since the assassination attempt, and found her seated near the window, watching the courtyard below with an expression of careful, guarded patience. She rose immediately upon seeing his face, reading the significant news evident in his expression before he even spoke a word. You found him, she said, the person responsible. Roth, Damien confirmed, crossing the room to take her hands in his. My own advisor. He has been taken into custody and will face formal judgment for his crimes. Relief and lingering fear warred visibly across Alara's features as the full weight of the revelation settled over her. It's truly over then, the danger. That particular danger, yes, Damien said carefully, unwilling to offer false certainty about a kingdom still adjusting to circumstances no one had fully anticipated. Though there remains considerable work ahead, convincing my council that our bond deserves formal recognition despite the complications it has created. Alara studied his face carefully, searching for any hint of hesitation or renewed doubt. Finding none, she allowed herself, for the first time since arriving at this palace as a condemned prisoner, to imagine a future that extended beyond simple survival, a future where the bond her grandmother had once described in bedtime stories might actually prove to be exactly the gift those old tales had always promised. Whatever work remains, she said quietly, I am ready to face it, provided I do not have to face it alone. Never alone, Damien promised, pulling her gently into his arms. Not as long as my wolf continues to recognize you as exactly what he has known you to be since that very first night in the dungeon. Outside, word of Roth's arrest had already begun spreading through the palace, carried by servants and guards alike, transforming quickly from whispered rumor into confirmed fact. The kingdom that had spent weeks, uncertain about its king's divided loyalties, now faced an entirely new question, one that would determine not only Damien's future, but the future shape of the throne itself. The formal council session called to address Roth's treason and, inevitably, the broader question of the king's bond drew every remaining elder to the chamber, along with several senior pack members who rarely involved themselves directly in political proceedings. Word of the assassination attempt and Roth's subsequent arrest had spread throughout the kingdom, and the chamber buzzed with tense anticipation as Damien took his place at the head of the table. Isolde sat beside him, an unusual arrangement that immediately drew curious glances from the assembled council, though her presence had been carefully explained beforehand as representing the Silverfang Pack's interest in ensuring continued peaceful relations, regardless of whatever decisions this council ultimately reached. Corwin rose first, his aged voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite its natural thinness. "Your Majesty, this council has reviewed the evidence regarding Advisor Roth's actions. His guilt appears beyond reasonable doubt, and formal punishment for treason will proceed according to established law." "Agreed," Damien said. "I trust the council will handle sentencing appropriately." "We will," Corwin confirmed. "However, Your Majesty, Roth's crimes, however severe, do not resolve the underlying question that prompted his desperate actions in the first place. The matter of your bond and its implications for this kingdom's stability remains unaddressed." Damien had anticipated this challenge, had spent considerable time preparing his response, yet still felt the weight of the moment pressing heavily against his composure as every eye in the chamber turned toward him expectantly. "Princess Isolde and I have discussed an alternative arrangement," Damien said, gesturing toward the princess seated beside him. "One that secures continued peace and cooperation between our territories, without requiring a marriage neither of us genuinely desires." Isolde rose smoothly, addressing the council with the same composed confidence she had shown since her arrival. "My father's original goal was ensuring lasting peace along our shared border. Elders, not securing a marriage for its own sake. I propose instead a formal treaty of mutual defense and trade, one that accomplishes precisely the same protective purpose without requiring either myself or King Damien to enter a union neither of us wishes to pursue." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, several elders exchanging uncertain glances. An older woman near the chamber's far end, one of the more traditionally minded council members, rose to voice the concern Damien had anticipated most. "With respect, Princess, marriages between ruling families provide security that mere treaties historically fail to guarantee," she said. "Treaties can be broken far more easily than blood bonds forged through marriage and shared heirs." "A fair concern," Isolde acknowledged, "though I would argue a marriage entered reluctantly, by two people whose genuine loyalties lie elsewhere, provides considerably less security than either of you might assume. My father sought peace, not merely the appearance of security built upon a foundation neither party truly believes in." The elder considered this carefully, clearly weighing the princess's logic against long-held traditional assumptions about the necessity of political marriage. Before she could respond further, another voice rose from further down the table, sharper and more openly hostile than the previous speaker's measured concern. "This entire discussion avoids the true question at hand," said a younger council member named Talia, her expression carrying evident disapproval. "Your Majesty proposes bonding formally with a human servant, elevating her to a position no human has ever held within this kingdom's history. That is not merely a matter of diplomatic arrangement, but a fundamental challenge to traditions this pack has maintained for generations." Damien felt his composure tighten, though he forced himself to respond with measured calm, rather than the defensive anger his wolf urged him toward. "Traditions exist to serve this kingdom's well-being, Talia, not to constrain it beyond reasonable purpose. My wolf has chosen Alara as my true mate. That bond exists regardless of whether this council chooses to formally recognize it. And if this council refuses that recognition," Talia pressed, "what then, Your Majesty? Will you abandon your throne rather than accept our judgment?" The question, though clearly intended as challenge rather than genuine inquiry, landed with unexpected weight across the chamber. Damien felt the full gravity of what Talia had just asked settle over him, recognizing that the answer he gave now would define not only his own future, but the fundamental relationship between Crown and Council for generations to come. He rose slowly from his seat, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough to ensure every word he spoke next would carry its full intended weight. "I have spent my entire life believing duty to this kingdom required setting aside personal desire whenever the two conflicted," Damien said, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was about to declare. I believed that faithfully, right up until the moment I watched my wolf recognize a bond so profound that denying it felt less like duty and more like a betrayal of everything my position as alpha is meant to represent. He paused, meeting the eyes of every elder seated around the table before continuing. If this council cannot accept Alara as my rightful mate and queen, then I will step down from this throne, he said, the words landing with the finality of a decision already fully made. Not because I no longer value this kingdom's well-being, but because I refuse to lead a people whose traditions demand I abandon the one bond my wolf has ever recognized as true. The chamber fell into stunned silence, several elders exchanging shocked glances at the magnitude of what their king had just declared. Even Ysolde, who had known something significant was coming, appeared genuinely surprised by the depth of conviction underlying Damien's words. Corwin was the first to break the silence, his aged voice carrying newfound gravity. Your Majesty, you would truly abandon your throne for this bond? I would, Damien confirmed without hesitation, because a throne maintained by denying my own wolf's truth is not a throne worth keeping, regardless of the political convenience such denial might otherwise provide. The chamber erupted into hushed, urgent conversation, elders turning to one another to debate the unprecedented situation now facing them. Damien remained standing, allowing the discussion to unfold without further interruption, his wolf finally settling into something resembling peace, now that the truth had been spoken plainly and without compromise. It was Bryn, entering the chamber quietly from a side entrance where she had been observing the proceedings, who finally spoke words that shifted the room's uncertain mood. I have served 3 generations of this royal family, the elderly healer said, her voice carrying clearly despite its age-worn thinness. I have watched countless political arrangements come and go, alliances formed and broken, according to whatever necessity the moment demanded, but I have never, in 30 years of service, witnessed a bond as genuine as the one I confirmed between our king and the woman currently residing within these palace walls. She paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled elders with quiet but unmistakable authority. Tradition exists to protect what matters most to our people, not to sacrifice it unnecessarily. A king willing to abandon his throne, rather than betray his true mate, is not a king weakened by instinct. He is a king strengthened by integrity, exactly the kind of leadership this kingdom has always claimed to value most highly. Her words settled over the chamber with unexpected weight, several elders visibly reconsidering their positions in light of the healer's long-standing credibility and evident wisdom. Talia, though still clearly uncomfortable with the unprecedented nature of the situation, said nothing further, apparently recognizing that the momentum in the room had shifted decisively away from her earlier objections. Corwin rose once more, his expression thoughtful as he addressed the chamber. This council will need time to fully consider the implications of what has been discussed today, he said. But I, for one, am not prepared to lose a king of demonstrated integrity and courage simply because his bonded mate happens to be human rather than pack-born. Perhaps it is time this kingdom's traditions evolve to match the wisdom our own healer has just offered us. Murmurs of cautious agreement rippled through the chamber, though clearly not every elder present felt fully convinced. Still, the immediate crisis of Damien's threatened abdication seemed to have shifted the conversation toward genuine reconsideration rather than outright rejection, a small but significant victory that Damien had not been entirely certain he would achieve when he first rose to speak. As the council session finally adjourned, elders departing the chamber in small, murmuring groups, still debating the unprecedented developments they had just witnessed, Damien allowed himself a rare moment of cautious relief. The path ahead remained uncertain, formal recognition of his bond with Alara still far from guaranteed, but for the first time since this entire ordeal began, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps, with enough patience and continued integrity, his kingdom might yet find a way to embrace what his wolf had already known from that very first night in the dungeon. Weeks passed before the council reached its final decision, weeks filled with careful negotiation, formal hearings, and countless private conversations between Damien and the elders, still hesitant to fully embrace such an unprecedented shift in tradition. Throughout it all, Alara remained steady beside him, attending sessions when permitted, answering questions honestly when asked, and slowly, patiently, earning trust from council members who had initially viewed her only as an unwelcome complication. Roth's formal sentencing concluded early in this period, the council determining that his attempted murder of an innocent woman, regardless of whatever misguided justification he offered, warranted permanent exile from the kingdom, rather than the harsher punishment some elders had initially favored. Damien accepted the ruling without objection, recognizing that mercy tempered with genuine consequence served his kingdom better than vengeance alone, even against a man who had so thoroughly betrayed his trust. Princess Isolde's proposed treaty of mutual defense and trade proceeded through formal negotiation, alongside the ongoing debate about Damien's bond, and within a month, both kingdoms had ratified an agreement that satisfied every practical concern the original marriage arrangement had been intended to address. Isolde returned to her own territory as autumn approached, though not before extending genuine friendship to Alara, an unexpected alliance born from circumstances neither woman could have anticipated when they first learned of each other's existence. "You have a formidable king," Isolde told Alara during their final conversation before her departure, the two women walking slowly through the palace gardens as afternoon light filtered golden through autumn leaves. "One willing to sacrifice everything for what he believes is right. That kind of integrity is rare, Alara, in kings and commoners alike." "I still find myself amazed some mornings," Alara admitted, "that any of this is truly happening. A few short months ago, I woke each day, certain it would be my last. Life has a curious way of transforming even our darkest moments into unexpected beginnings," Isolde said, with a small, genuine smile. "I wish you both every happiness this bond deserves." The final council session, addressing formal recognition of Damien's bond, convened on a crisp morning in early autumn, the chamber once again filled with every elder and senior pack member the kingdom could summon. This time, however, the atmosphere carried none of the earlier tension and hostility. Weeks of careful demonstration, of Alara's genuine character revealed through patient interaction rather than hurried judgment, had shifted the council's collective mood towards something considerably closer to acceptance. Corwin rose to address the chamber one final time, his aged voice carrying quiet authority as he delivered the council's decision. After careful consideration, he began, "This council formally recognizes Alara as the true and rightful mate of King Damien Ashgrove, with all rights and privileges befitting a future queen of this kingdom." A wave of relief washed over Damien so profound it nearly buckled his composed exterior, though he maintained his dignity as king, even as his wolf howled triumphantly beneath the surface. Beside him, Alara's hand found his, and he gripped it tightly, both of them finally allowing themselves to fully believe that the impossible journey they had traveled together had reached its rightful conclusion. "There remains, however," Corwin continued, "the matter of formal bonding, a ceremony this kingdom has not witnessed, involving a human mate in its recorded history. We defer to your Majesty's judgment regarding how such a ceremony might proceed, blending traditional elements with whatever adaptations seem appropriate given these unprecedented circumstances." Damien rose, addressing the chamber with a warmth and gratitude he had not permitted himself to fully express throughout the preceding weeks of careful negotiation. "Thank you, honored elders, for your willingness to reconsider tradition when genuine wisdom demanded it. I promise you, every one of you, that this bond will strengthen our kingdom rather than weaken it, exactly as my wolf recognized from that very first night." The formal bonding ceremony took place 3 weeks later, on a clear afternoon, beneath the same autumn sky that had witnessed so much of their difficult journey together. The palace gardens, where Alara had first spoken with Bryn during those uncertain early days, had been transformed with careful decoration, autumn flowers and flowing fabric creating a setting both elegant and deeply personal. Alara stood beneath an arch of woven branches, dressed in flowing fabric the color of early morning sunlight, her dark hair adorned simply but beautifully, watching as Damien approached along a path lined with members of his pack, council elders, and citizens who had gathered to witness this unprecedented moment in their kingdom's history. Bryn, who had requested the honor of overseeing the ceremony herself, stood ready to guide them through the traditional bonding rites, her weathered face carrying evident pride and satisfaction at having played such a pivotal role in confirming the bond that had brought them to this moment. "Alpha King Damien Ashgrove," Bryn began, her voice carrying clearly across the gathered assembly, "do you accept Alara as your true and bonded mate, promising to honor, protect, and cherish her for all the days your wolf walks this earth? I do, Damien said, his voice steady with a certainty that had only grown stronger through every trial they had faced together. Without hesitation, and without any doubt remaining in either my heart or my wolf. Alara, Bryn continued, turning to face her, do you accept Damien as your true and bonded mate, promising to stand beside him through whatever challenges the future may bring, as equal partner and queen of this kingdom? Alara looked into Damien's gold-flecked eyes, remembering the terror of that first night in the dungeon, the uncertainty of every day that followed, and the slow, patient growth of trust and love that had brought them finally to this moment of celebration rather than fear. I do, she said, her voice carrying clearly, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her, with absolute certainty, and with gratitude for every difficult step that led us here. The bond between them, already confirmed by instinct and wolf alike, settled fully into place as they exchanged the ceremonial vows, a warmth spreading through both of them that felt, finally, like coming home after a long and difficult journey. The assembled crowd erupted into celebration, cheers and applause echoing through the palace gardens as their king and new queen embraced beneath the autumn sky. In the months that followed, Alara settled into her role as queen with the same quiet strength and honesty that had first drawn Damien's wolf to recognize her worth. She worked closely with Bryn to establish new resources for the kingdom's most vulnerable citizens, ensuring no one else would ever face the kind of powerless injustice she had nearly suffered herself. She earned the respect of council members who had once doubted her, not through grand gestures, but through consistent integrity and genuine care for the people whose lives her decisions now touched. Damien, for his part, found his leadership strengthened rather than weakened by the bond he had once feared might destroy his throne entirely. His wolf, finally at peace with its chosen mate secured beside him, brought a steadiness and clarity to his decisions that even the most traditional council members grudgingly acknowledged had improved his judgment considerably since those uncertain early days. The kingdom that had once seemed on the verge of destabilizing conflict instead entered an era of renewed strength, its people inspired by a king who had proven willing to sacrifice everything, even his throne, rather than betray the truth his wolf had recognized from the very beginning. Word of their story spread beyond the kingdom's borders, carried by merchants and travelers alike, a tale that would be told for generations about an alpha king whose wolf had chosen love over convenience, and a servant girl who had proven, against every impossible circumstance, exactly worthy of that unprecedented choice. On quiet evenings, when the demands of ruling finally eased enough to allow rest, Damien and Alara would often find themselves in the same palace gardens where so much of their story had unfolded, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of orange and gold, grateful for a bond that had ultimately proven stronger than any throne, any tradition, or any danger that had tried, and failed, to keep them apart. Their reign, built upon a foundation of genuine partnership rather than mere political convenience, would come to be remembered as one of the most prosperous and peaceful in the kingdom's long history, a lasting testament to the truth Bryn had spoken so many months before, that a bond recognized by a wolf's ancient instinct, however unexpected or inconvenient its timing, was rarely wrong about the strength it would ultimately provide.